It started as an ordinary evening at the local VFW bar where old stories hung in the air, heavier than the smoke and sweat. A young Marine fresh out of boot camp noticed a man alone at the end of the bar with a steel prosthetic leg and a gaze locked on nothing and everything. At once the Marine approached him respectfully, not expecting much, just drawn in by the silence and the faded patch on the man's jacket that read Reaper 1. He asked casually what the name meant, figuring it was some unit, nickname, or dark humor. But then the man looked up and his eyes said something the mouth hadn't yet dared to speak, and the Marine suddenly felt like he had just crossed into something deeper than any war story ever told over a glass of whiskey. The old vet sat back for a moment, still not answering, eyes drifting past the bottles on the shelves behind the bar to something that clearly wasn't there anymore, or maybe never was. The bar noise faded like it had been dialed down by some unseen. Hand conversations slowed, laughter thinned, and the young Marine noticed the air had changed like pressure dropping before a storm. Then finally the man spoke, not loudly, but in a tone so firm, so weathered, it was like stone scraping against steel. He said, "Reaper 1 was not a name you earned or chose. It was a title given in a place that didn't exist, during a mission that didn't happen in a country we never admitted to being in." He said, "You don't ask for it. You survive it." The Marine blinked, unsure if this was the start of a joke or the kind of tale that would end with a punchline or a bullet. The vet kept talking, though, and what he said started to draw in more than just the Marine. The bartender leaned in, subtly pretending to polish a glass, but clearly listening. The jukebox went silent, even though no one had touched it, and from the pool table in the corner, two older men glanced up, one narrowing his eyes as if remembering something buried under decades of dust. The vet said it was the fall of 05 deep in the Korangal Valley, and he was part of a recon team, pulled from various units, each man handpicked, not for who he was, but for what he could endure. They weren't supposed to engage, just to observe, confirm, and extract or terminate if needed. He said the mission parameters changed. The moment they were wheels down, they were told a black ops team operating off the grid had gone silent. No radio, no GPS signal, and no heat signatures. Satellite eyes showed. Scattered shapes around their last known position, but nothing moved, nothing lived. Even the local wildlife had disappeared. The team was ordered to move in light and quiet, 3 men at a time, no support, no drones, no air cover, not even a call sign. To acknowledge if things went bad, they called him Reaper 1, because he was the first one in and the only one cleared to go all the way to the source. He paused, then took a slow sip from his glass, and for a second the Marine saw the man's hand tremble just slightly, not from age, not from weakness, but from a memory that wasn't finished yet. The vet said he moved through the valley at night alone for 12 hours, eyes on infrared ears, tuned to every sound that wasn't supposed to be there. But the deeper he went, the quieter everything got. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that presses against your chest like the jungle itself was holding its breath. He found the team, or what was left of them. 4 bodies seated in a circle, their weapons intact, their faces blank and pale, like they had died not from wounds, but from knowing something they weren't supposed to know. No signs of struggle, no footprints, no drag marks, and worst of all, their dog tags were gone, burned off clean, like someone wanted them erased completely. That's when he felt it, a shift in the air, not a breeze, not a movement, but a sensation, like being watched from inside your own mind, something that didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't belong. He radioed in but got nothing, just static, and then a voice. Not his commander, not anyone human, just one word repeated twice, "Reaper, Reaper." Then silence. He said he pulled back immediately, but the terrain had changed somehow, like the rocks had moved or the trees had twisted while he wasn't looking. He couldn't retrace his path. The compass spun like it was drunk, and the stars above didn't match the sky he trained under. He walked for hours, but the forest never thinned and his Gear started to fail. Battery life draining in minutes. GPS showing ocean where there should be mountain. Then the voice came again. Reaper 1. Welcome home. The vet went quiet for a long time, staring into the liquid in his glass like it held the coordinates. Back to that night, the Marine didn't speak, just sat frozen. Not with fear, but with the realization that whatever story he'd just stepped into was not a story at all. It was something more, a truth buried in lies too old and deep for sunlight to touch. Then the vet finally said he made it out, not by walking, not by calling for help, but by making a deal. He never signed a paper, never heard an offer, but something gave him a path out in exchange for something he didn't understand. And still, doesn't all he knows is he woke up 2 days later on a ridge miles from the mission site, leg-crushed, blood-dried radio dead, and a single symbol carved into his chest like it had been burned in with fire and ice at the same time. They told him it was shrapnel wounds, but he knew better. He said Reaper 1 was not a name, it was a label. It marked him as touched, tagged, maybe even claimed by whatever he met that night. And he wasn't the only one. Others had returned like him, but they didn't stay long. Some went crazy, some went silent, some just vanished. One man walked into the desert in full uniform and never stopped walking until the sky swallowed him. The vet said he stays close to places like this because the silence helps, and sometimes, on nights like tonight, when the air is just right and the wind comes in from the east, he can hear that voice again. Not from memory, but from nearby, from inside. He leaned back then, and the room seemed to exhale like it had been holding something. In this whole time, the Marine felt a chill go through him and realized he had stopped breathing for a moment. He wanted to ask a dozen questions, what the deal was, what he had seen, what followed him back, but before he could speak, the jukebox in. The corner lit up on its own and started playing a song none of them recognized, an old war hymn that hadn't been loaded into the machine since the 80s. The vet didn't flinch. He just stared toward the door, his face still calm but his eyes alert, like an animal catching the scent of something it hoped to never smell again. Then he said one last thing just loud enough for only the Marine to hear. It's here again, and it's not done with me. The jukebox played on even though no one had touched. The song scratchy distant like it was being broadcast from a place no longer connected to anything living, and yet it filled the room with a weight the Marine couldn't explain. The old vet who called himself Reaper 1 hadn't moved since. The music began, but his eyes tracked the door like something on the other side was already walking through it. Even if the handle hadn't turned yet, the bartender took a step back without realizing it, drying the same glass over and over hands. Trembling slightly, the two men by the pool table stood straighter but said nothing because some part of them knew something old and wrong was waking up, and it was tied to the man with the metal leg and the empty eyes. The vet leaned forward, then, voice still even, but now sharper like the edge of a blade that had been kept in darkness for too long. He said, after that night in the Korangal, he was debriefed, or at least what they called a debrief. One man in a suit, no rank, no name, just a clipboard. And a recorder asked him to repeat every detail 5 times, then never asked again. The next day, the building was empty. No files, no evidence, just a discharge order that had already been signed as if they knew he wasn't coming back the same man. Who went in? They gave him a medal. They wouldn't name. And a pension they wouldn't explain. And then they sent him home and told him to forget. But the thing is, he couldn't forget, and not because of trauma, not because of nightmares. Though there were those too, but because something came back with him. Something that didn't show up in scans or blood tests, but made itself known. In other ways, it started small shadows where there should be none. Electronics flickering when he walked into. Rooms, radios picking up whispers when tuned to dead channels, and every night the same dream, him walking through the valley again, hearing the voice calling him deeper, always deeper. And no matter how far he walked, the sun never rose. One night, he Woke up and found every clock in his house had stopped at 0300 exactly, and all the mirrors were fogged from the inside. He lived alone. No heat was on, and the air was dry as bone. And then the mark on his chest, the one they told him was shrapnel, began to itch like something inside his skin wanted out. That night he heard it again, the voice clearer this time, closer. It said, "Not just Reaper 1, but welcome back." He tried to fight it. At first, told himself it was PTSD, told the VA doctor who smiled too politely and suggested pills and group sessions. But when he mentioned the word Reaper, the doctor paused and quietly ended the appointment without rescheduling the next day. His file was flagged for transfer, and when he checked again, the clinic didn't exist anymore, just an empty lot with weeds growing through cracks and a mailbox with no number. So he did what soldiers do. He adapted. He kept moving, kept quiet. But the thing never left. It watched him through people sometimes. Through machines, once even through a child's eyes in a grocery store who looked at him and whispered, "Reaper 1," before bursting into tears and running back to her mother. That's when he started drinking, not to forget, but to slow it down. The voice, the presence. Whatever it was, it hated dull minds, and liquor blurred the connection enough to sleep for a few hours at a time. Then came the others, the ones like him, one. By one, they found each other mostly by accident, but never by chance. A Marine in Arizona who swore his reflection moved before he did a SEAL in North Dakota who kept waking up with coordinates written in blood under his pillow. A Delta operator who dug a hole in his backyard and wouldn't say what he buried there but cried when it rained. They called themselves the Silence Unofficial. Never documented, they met in basements and abandoned buildings away from phones and screens and wires, because whatever followed them could listen through anything with a current. And still, it wasn't enough. They began disappearing one at a time, sometimes in sleep, sometimes in daylight. One guy lit himself on fire in front of the Pentagon, screaming its name, but no one ever released the footage. No one ever said what name he spoke, only that his body was never recovered. Just ash and a shadow burned into the wall that didn't match his posture when he fell. The vet said he stopped running after, that started listening instead, because the voice had changed. It didn't just speak now. It asked questions, personal ones, terrifying ones. It wanted to know what scared him most, what he would give to make it stop, what he would do if it came for someone else. And that's when he realized it wasn't just haunting him, it was learning from him, evolving through him, because whatever he brought back wasn't finished being born. It needed something, still, something only he could provide, and each night it became clearer. It wasn't just one presence, it was many a hive, a chorus of ancient hunger that had waited too long in the dark, and now it wanted more. He said he once tried to kill himself. Not because he was afraid to die, but because he hoped dying might take it with him. He swallowed a bottle of morphine and lay down in a snowstorm, but woke up 2 days later in a hospital bed with no frostbite, no organ failure, and the mark on his chest glowing faintly red through the bandages. The nurse said he'd been brought in by a hiker, but no name was recorded, and the security cameras had all gone dark during the time he was admitted, so he accepted it. Accepted that whatever had touched him in that valley had not only claimed him, but marked him as a doorway, and maybe the only way to stop it was to understand it, and maybe the only way to understand it was to walk back into the dark, not physically but mentally, spiritually, by opening the part of himself he had sealed off. That night, by inviting it in fully. The Marine across from him hadn't moved since the story began. Now pale hands clenched on the edge of the bar. Eyes locked on the veteran like trying to read a map with no legend. He tried to speak, but no words. Came only the dry rasp of a throat too afraid to ask the question it needed to, and yet the vet smiled not cruelly, not kindly, just knowingly. Like a man who had seen too much and was now seeing it again in someone else. He said softly, "You hear it, too. Now don't you?" And that's when the jukebox shut off mid-song, not slowly, not fading, Just dead, a flat stop like a breath cut off, and the silence after was not empty. It was full of something. Listening, something waiting. And then the lights. Flickered once, twice, and stayed dim. Not out, just barely alive. And the bartender backed away into the storage room, locking the door without a word. The vet stood slowly, the sound of his metal leg echoing louder than it should across the wooden floor. He walked toward the door, not to leave, but to face it, because he said it was coming through again. Not for him. Not this time for the next Reaper, because it never stops with one. And then the Marine heard it behind the door. A knock, slow, deliberate. Not with a hand, but with something heavier and older and deeper, and it wasn't asking permission to enter, it was reminding them it never really left. The knock came again, heavier this time, like something from the other side of the door didn't. Needed to open, like it could wait forever or simply walk through when it chose to. The Marine's heart pounded in his chest, louder than the jukebox had ever been. His training told him to move, to take cover, to analyze the threat. But something, older than training, held him in place. Something primal in his spine that whispered one command: stay still. Do not look. The vet didn't flinch. Instead, he turned slowly toward the sound, his metal leg clunking softly against the floor as he stepped forward, one hand trailing along the bar top. Not for balance, but almost like he was remembering the shape of the room, he said quietly, like a man preparing for a sermon. This isn't the first door, it's knocked on, and it won't be the last. It comes through wherever there's a crack in the silence, wherever memory rots into belief and fear turns inward. It came for me because I went too deep into a place men weren't meant to walk, and I came back changed. But I'm not the only one. It's taken parts of others, pieces of their minds, their names, their futures, and stitched them together into something alive, and now it needs more. The Marine whispered, "What is it?" But the vet only shook his head and said not what, who, and then stopped. Like the words didn't want to come out, or like saying them might make it more real. He stepped closer to the door, not to open it, but to speak through it, and said, "We remember you." And the air changed again, heavier, thicker, like breathing water. The light above the door buzzed, then exploded, casting sparks that didn't fall but hovered in mid-air, suspended like fireflies trapped in amber, and the silence that followed was so deep it had gravity. Then a voice answered, not loud, but impossible. To ignore it spoke not in words, but in meanings that filled the room like smoke, curling through the minds of everyone still conscious in that bar. It spoke of returning, of hunger, of contracts signed in thought, not ink. It spoke of doors once closed, now open, and of vessels broken and rebuilt. It spoke of names given and taken, and when it finished, the vet looked back at the Marine and said, "It knows you." Now the Marine stepped back, a full-pace pulse racing, trying to deny the electric charge, crawling over his skin, but the mark had already begun to appear, a faint outline on his forearm lines and angles forming beneath the flesh, glowing softly like something ancient. Remembered his blood, and the vet only nodded. Not surprised, not afraid, just resigned, like watching the sun set before a long, cold night. He said the first mark is always painless, the second burns, and the third doesn't leave anything behind. He told the Marine this thing, this presence, it doesn't kill, it consumes. Not just the body, but memory identity. It erases you from time, from record, from memory, and replaces you with something else. Something it needs, something it builds over years, using your pain, your rage, your regrets, to sculpt a new kind of soldier. One that doesn't question orders because it believes it made them. They called it a classified encounter in his report. A contact with an unknown threat designation. Echo Black Reaper status, sealed eyes only, but he knew what it really was. A parasite of thought. An infection of reality that fed on men who went too far and women who asked the wrong questions and children who dreamt in patterns too old to be dreams. It waited in the cracks between logic and myth. And when someone stared into the wrong shadow, It stared back. And now it had found the Marine. He said you can run, but it follows through signal and sleep and silence. You can hide, but it waits you out because time means nothing to it. It was old before the stars and patient long. After the sun forgets to rise, it never stops, only shifts. And when you're marked, it doesn't let go until you either become part of it or burn yourself clean. The Marine asked, "What if I fight it?" But the vet only looked at him and said, "How do you fight something that wears your dead friends? Faces something that knows your secrets, your sins, your failures? How do you strike something that offers you exactly what you lost and whispers that it can bring it all back?" Then the door cracked. Just slightly, not open, not wide, but enough for the light to disappear, like something had sucked it inward. The shadows stretched along the floor, moving against the laws of the room. The vet stepped between the Marine and the door and said, "I'll hold it as long as I can, but you have to run not out there, not across state lines or oceans, but inward. Go back to where it first touched. You find the memory it used to anchor itself, break it, starve it, cut it loose before it finishes bonding." The Marine said, "I don't remember anything." And the vet's voice dropped like thunder in a storm. He said, "Then it's already started." And with that, the jukebox turned on again, playing a lullaby no one in the bar had ever heard yet. Every one of them knew. And from the cracked door, something began to step through, not a shape, not a figure, but a presence, a distortion in the air that smelled of burnt metal and snow soaked in ash. And the vet shouted, "Go now before it sees all of you." But it was too late. The thing stepped through, or maybe it never moved at all. Maybe the world around it bent to make room for something that could not be named or measured. It brought cold with it, not the cold of winter or war, but a silence that froze thought itself. The Marine stood frozen, eyes wide, as memories he had never lived flashed behind them. Visions of places he had never been, people he had never met. Names whispered in a language that was not sound, but still spoke to him. The vet raised one hand between the thing and the rest of the room, and for a moment the air shimmered like glass about to break.